folks, welcome back to the Dormouse's desk. I am that Dormouse and this is said desk. Today we're going to do a currently inked. I'm going to show you something that I've not seen but found, and we're going to do some 8 questions. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, question 1, when and how did my fountain pen journey begin? And it was well before the pandemic when I was heavily into bullet journaling. And I'd make really elaborate artsy spreads to 1, spend time relaxing with art, and 2, to keep myself accountable. And all the while, I was desperately trying to improve my handwriting and my lettering and my art. And as it turns out, it's very difficult to maintain the gumption to create these types of spreads when you're in lockdown and your life has stalled. There was just nothing left to plan for. And so I stopped doing spreads and started doing long form journaling. I just sort of needed an outlet to process what was happening in the world. And somewhere in there, I wound up with a Lamy All-Star in tourmaline. And then I remembered that I had a friend who was very heavily into fountain pens, and there was no coming back after her penabling. Question 2, what was my favorite fountain pen ink at the beginning and what is it now? And I don't think I ever had one. I got Sailor's Soughton early, as well as Diamine Sargasso C, and I still really love those both. And Soughton is my default pen testing ink, and I'd say more than specific inks, my preferences for color family has changed. In the start, I really loved purples and greens, and I still do, but now, if you looked at the color breakdown of my inks on Fountain Pen Companion, you could look me up, my username is Dormouse, you'd see a lot of yellows, oranges, and browns. I never would have guessed that I was so drawn to brown ink, but that's just where I'm at right now. Ink brand preferences changed too. Now I'm not so attracted to Diamine, Colorverse, or Noodlers, but rather really love Iroshizuku, Sailor, and Wieringal. And next year, I expect all of these preferences to change again. And question 3, how have your pen and ink preferences changed? Well, I think I probably just answered that. For pens, though, everyone goes through a period of figuring out what they like, and in that process of throwing spaghetti against the wall, you sort of realize a few things. 1, you're going to find out what you like and what you don't like, and 2, you're also going to amass a collection that's pretty likely aimless. It happens, and it's normal, but now that I'm a few years into the hobby, I don't want just a collection of random stuff. So I'm actively trying to cultivate a collection that means something. For me, it means it has to have a story. It has a history, and it's not just another thing. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop buying ecos, but it does mean that I have to think harder about all of my purchases. Okay, quickly, question 4. Are there any new inks or pens that you have yet to try but would like to? And for inks, yes, all of them. I'm more into inks than pens, particularly because the barrier to entry is much lower, and partially because I find ink fascinating. One of my favorite things is water chromatography, and seeing ink split and travel across the page makes me very happy. The new Uramiku line is interesting, more Wieringal inks. I need to explore more Van Diemen's. There's no end to the list. For pens, I'm really curious to try a Benu. I desperately want to try a Scribo Puma with a flexi nib, and I really like the synesthesia line. I want to try more vintage pens like a Waterman and try to see if Flex is for me. Okay, question 5. What is my holy grail pen? I don't really have one. Like, I don't have a pen that I'm actively hunting for. There are pens outside my budget that I'd be interested in, like the Visconti Homo sapiens, the ash white lava version, or, the Scribo, but they're in my out of budget category. They're probably fairly easy to get a hold of, so I can't necessarily classify those as a grail pen. There is no search for those. So yeah, I don't really have one at the moment. Okay, question 6. How many pens do you currently own? And I own somewhere around 40. A big chunk of that number were pens gifted to me by really generous pen friends. One of the pens in that collection I won, and yeah, the rest I bought myself. But yeah, a solid quarter of my pens were gifted to me. So I'm very lucky to have such kind friends. I love you all. Thank you for supporting the habit. We have to stick together, y'all. All right, question 7. What is my limit? Well, I had a hard limit of 30 pens last year. Last year I had a hard limit of 30 pens, but it's hard to keep when you have so many penablers in your life. 30 felt good because it's the exact amount of slots in my pen drawers, but luckily I have wide slots and some short and skinny pens that allow me to double up. So what's in the collection? Well, I have 5 pens dedicated to ink explorations. I have these 2 pens that you saw here, Frankenstein for pilot parallels, a few really cheap pens, and some ink exploration Twisbys. And then I have a handful of higher end gold nib pens. So it runs the gamut. I have really, really cheap and some fairly expensive pens. Okay, so let's start off with the first pen. And again, this month I've been trying to work through some of my samples, and I'm doing a pretty good job, but there are a couple of pens that I inked with bottled inks that I have. So this is a new pen for me. This is actually a Pelikan 400, which is a mid-century pen. So this is a vintage pen for me. I got it from Rick Propus. If I remember to, I'll leave his link in the description. This is a really lovely pen and really beautiful shape for its age, and I'm very excited to have it. So there's just a little bit of flex to it. I think it's Soughton. I think it's pronounced Soughton. Please let me know how this is pronounced. If you're a Japanese speaker, I would appreciate knowing how to say this because I really love this ink. And this ink I use almost always as like the first ink in any pen, just to have like an idea of how that pen functions. Did we do this backwards? Yep. Okay. It's like giving every pen like the benefit of the doubt because it's such a like nice wet ink, and I sort of know how it behaves. Gentle isn't a lie. It's very easy to wash out, and I just like it. Ink is a little bit different. I'm literally right now at my max on ink. I have 3 drawers dedicated to inks, and there's absolutely no more room for bottles, and I have just a handful of slots available for samples, and this is why I'm trying to make such an effort to use up all of the near empty samples. So yeah, my max is dictated by my space, and I'm not going to start cluttering up my house when I already have more ink here than I'll ever be able to use in several lifetimes. And I just don't want that guilt. Thinking about, Swedish death cleaning, do you really want some poor soul after you die to try to figure out what to do with a whole closet full of ink? It's just sort of, that tends to keep me better behaved. It won't stop me, but it'll slow me down, right? And I don't want to be a hoarder. Okay, so question number 8. What would I do if another pen came along? Well, if it was in my budget and it met my criteria, I would buy it. Like I said, I don't have a hard limit on pens. If it's something that I desire, then I'm gonna try to make it work. And 40 pens, it's probably a lot to some people, but some people probably laugh. That's like child's play, but I find that it's a manageable amount for me. And it keeps like enough pens in rotation. If I only use 6 pens a month, I find that I rotate through them at a fairly regular rate, and I don't feel like I'm neglecting any. And if I do end up neglecting pens, those are clearly the pens that I just shouldn't have, right? So it helps to narrow down the collection when I want to cull. And so yeah, that's it. Trying to look for things that bring me joy. Trying not to overwhelm my wallet and my space. And yeah, that's my answer to the 8 questions. Thank you so much, Simone and Leanne Mikes. If you haven't seen the original videos for these, go out and do them because go out and watch them because it's really fascinating. And a lot of people have already put up answers to these questions. So yeah, head on out and watch what other people say to these questions. Okay, next pen, also a vintage pen. I believe these are called Sailor Minis, and this one has hearts on it. These are really nice pocket pens, and I find that I actually use this a lot. I keep it with my planner. It's a great planner pen. So I'm just going to call it a Sailor Mini heart. This is an extra fine. It's such a cute little pen. A little banged up and scratched here and there, but it writes really nicely. And it's just so adorable. This ink, though, I'm not enamored with. I haven't been quite sold on it yet. I think the color is alright, but it feels just a little bit dry. And that's coming out of a gold nib, so it has to be kind of dry, right? Next up is the Tools to Live by Lachette. It's very cute. It has a kitty cat on the nib. You've seen this pen on my channel before. This is a fine nib, I think, but you would never know with this ink. I used to think that this was probably my favorite red ink just because of how bright it is. But as I have gone through the sample, I think I've realized that this is not an ink for me. I'm not enamored with it. I have a hard time with red inks though, so it's not, I don't think that's something surprising coming out of my mouth. As far as the sample though, I'm not really sure how we're going to get this out of here. So I'm just going to squirt some out of the converter and then we'll hope for the best. And by the way, that Pilot black cartridge ink just smears and never dries. So beware. See, I've been writing this with this pen for weeks already, and I'm only at half the cartridge. And this is such a wet situation going on. The ink is pretty wet, so I would, if this were in a different color, I probably would have written through this already. See how bright it is? It's such a happy red ink. But there's something about red that I can't do. I just don't grab it. The other thing about this ink is that it has a gold sheen to it, but it sheens so easily that it gets lost. Like the base color gets lost, and that's sort of the color that I like, quote unquote. But it's just, I don't know. It's a problem for me. Next up is my Pilot 823. This is in the amber color. This has a medium nib on it. It had been a while since I inked this up, and I really wanted to finish up my sample of KWZ honey. And I tell you this as a warning. If you have a cat that won't be quiet, if you have a buddy, right, if you have one of these Peniter vacuum filler kajiggers, be careful when you use it not to really, I'd say don't give it more than like one pump, because you might suck out the nib and feed on your pen like I did, and then I had a heart attack. If that happens to you and you freak out, send me a note on Instagram or something, and I can like walk you through it, because I almost started crying. I was so upset by it. And what you might not know is that in pilot feeds, there's actually, at least in this pilot feed, there is a rod that goes down the center of it, and it was sticking out of the back of my feed. So if I tried to put the nib and feed back into the pen, the rod was sticking out into the body, which meant that I couldn't like push the plunger all the way back in, because that piece of the rod was in there. And then I got brave, and I twisted it a little bit and pushed it back into the feed, and now everything is fine again, and the pen still writes absolutely beautifully as it always had. But that was scary. So I don't want that to happen to you. If you freak out, let me know and I can walk you through it. I'll hold your hand. So this is Pilot 823. This is medium. So yes, it was sad that I lost the rest of that sample of KWZ honey. So instead, we went with Robert Oster Cafe, which is absolutely spelled weird. And it's fine. It's not my favorite brown. We all know that goes to Sailor, Texas. But it's also not bad. I think the thing that bothers me the most about this ink is that it doesn't really remind me of coffee, or coffee with cream in it. So there's that. This I still do have some sample of. yeah, I really don't have any complaints. The thunderstorm is a carryover from the ink exploration that I did last week. I can't keep track. Last week, and so I just consolidated all of the ink that was in all of my test pens into the one pen, which was pretty easy. I dumped everything into a sample vial, and then because these swipes have this sort of thing, this spring action converter in it, it was easy just to like shove it into the sample and smush it in and grab up all that extra ink, which is good because Thunderstorm is like one of my favorite inks. So I didn't want to waste any of that ink, but I also didn't want 5 extra pens laying around. So that's that. Let's take a look at some of these. The Sailor ink here. This is why it's my favorite. And you know, I just watched I think his channel is called An Ink Guy. He did a review of this ink and he wasn't getting very much sheen at all. But I find with all of my pens and in the writing, everything I put it in, I usually always get some of that red sheen, even in the writing. Not just in big swatches, but even in the writing I get that. So I'm not sure if it's variation between bottles, or if my bottle is a little bit older, maybe it's you know, evaporated a little bit, so it's a little bit darker. But I think that that's a fairly accurate representation of this ink, and I like it. Thunderstorm has a very little bit of sheen in it. I've never seen sheen in the writing. I've only seen it in big blobs like that. But I just like I like the ink a lot. So yeah. The Califolio Andronopal. This ink is probably not for me. Like I have a hard time with reds, I have a hard time with like pinks and magentas too for some reason. They're just sort of like not my cup of tea. It makes me feel like I'm like a 15-year-old schoolgirl or something. And so it's fine. It's fine, and it works, you know, really well in the pen. Little bit, tiny bit on the dry side, but you know, an extra fine nib. I think it does great in the extra fine nib, so it's okay. The Tatcha Benizicora, lots of sheen, lots of gold sheen, and it's still not quite dry yet. I like the ink and I don't like the ink. So yeah, one of my favorite reds, but that doesn't mean much of anything. But it's nice. It's a wet writing ink. The sheen shows up really well in the writing. The only time it doesn't is if the paper doesn't allow for it, but it's fine. The Robert Oster Cafe Crema is also, it's fine. It's not my favorite, but I didn't hate it. It was just perfectly fine to use. It wasn't like a standout favorite. Looks like I do get a little bit of black sheen in some of the writing, especially in these downstrokes here, a little bit in the swirly doos here, some in the eye and pilot, and there's just a little bit in the heavy spot of the swatching there, and a little bit through here. So is it haloing? Yeah, it's probably more haloing than actual sheen. But yeah, so now let's look at something else that came in this week. And I'm really excited to share with you because I've not heard anything about it. I just sort of found it on the choice called, it's the website called Squid's Choice, which seems to be owned by Atoya. And that is this. Let me back up a little bit further. Okay, that is this thing. This is a GugimFolio. And what that is, it says it's a Hanji notebook organizer made with wrinkled paper called Gugim, or Gugim Hanji, and it's produced by artisans in, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that, I will butcher it, but artisans in South Korea. So Gugim is a Korean traditional technique of crumpling paper by hand using 2 layers of wet hanji developed to make paper much stronger and more flexible than a layer of ordinary hanji. And it creates this unique texture and depth. Each cover is artfully handcrafted and hand painted. So this is an A5 notebook with 105 GSM paper in it. And where does it say what the paper is made from? Well, I don't know. But it does say that the slipcase is made from sugarcane paper, and everything is printed with soy ink. And this is the folio. It has this incredible texture. Sort of hear my hand going across the paper surface. The folio itself is paper. Everything is paper. And then it opens up and you have this, I love this orange color on the inside. There's a little pocket here. It comes with this sticker, instructions on how to replace the notepad, and then this notepad. I think hanji, and I might be wrong, is mulberry, made from mulberry trees. And so the folio and the paper insert on the inside is made from mulberry trees, and you can buy the inserts separately. If you look at it, it has a coated binding, and the A5 size has this blue color. You can open it, and it lays really nice and flat. Right? So the nice thing about the inserts is that the outer cover is perfectly white. If you're into decorating your notebooks, you have a beautiful blank canvas right here. And then the inside papers are yellow. And I think it looks really nice with this orange. It's very complimentary of the orange. So how is the paper with fountain pens? Well, I did a test. The test up here was done with my Pilot Parallel and that black Parallel, and it is literally the only thing on this page that has feathered. And I get that because that thing puts down a boatload of ink. But everything else looks really nice. This is not, though, a paper that is going to give you a lot of sheen. As a matter of fact, I didn't get any sheen at all, and that's after I put Van Diemen's Bioluminescence on here. And if you've seen that ink in action, it is extraordinarily sheeny. But it just sort of appears black here. What the paper does do well, one, it dries fairly fast. It shows a decent amount of shading. You can see it in the Cafe Crema. There's a nice amount of shading in that ink. Shimmer inks do fine, and then multi-chrome inks are okay. Like I can see the blue and I can see the purple in there. So it's really nice. Just sort of like regular paper that you can use fountain pens on. You're not going to have a lot of problems unless you write with a 3.8 nib and really extraordinarily wet ink. So yeah, if you don't care about sheen, and I generally don't, it is not my favorite ink feature, but maybe prefer more shading, then this is probably a paper that would interest you. I did do some writing specifically for the questions in this video, and the paper texture is quite smooth. It didn't feel dry. It was really, it was pleasant to write on. It's not, Tomoe River, but it's really nice. So I am pleased with this purchase, and I'm like really pleased to share it with you. I love that these are hand painted, and the texture is really satisfying. On that same note, last week or this week, what week did it come in? This week, I got both this folio and a Hobonichi 5-year journal, and the cover on that feels awful. It's just sort of plastic and cheapy, and that was not an inexpensive book to buy. And I understand that it's a lot of Tomoe River paper in it, but the cover makes it really unpleasant to hold. But if it were something more along the lines of this, granted you do get a lot of that paper creak sound. If it were something more along the lines of this, that would be interesting to me. Or if it were just maybe not so plasticky feeling, that would be interesting. If I didn't also have to buy a cover for it, that would be interesting to me. I'm not displeased with the Hobonichi 5-year. I sort of wish they would have done better with the covers. That's all. But yeah, so you can easily replace these. They just slip into this back cover here. I've seen them in a couple of places. Like I said, Octopus Choice, and then there's a place, I think it's in somewhere in the Northwest, that does art supplies, and I don't quite remember the name of their store, but they sell these. You can Google Hanaduri GugimFolios, and I'm sure they'll pop up. They come in 4 different colors. There's a green and orange one that I really waffled with. The decision was hard, but it had gray interior, and I really like how vibrant the orange interior is. So anyway, I did want to share this with you. Okay, so we had this. We had our currently inked. We had our 8 questions, which I really hope that you enjoyed hearing. Thank you for joining me this time around, and I will talk to you next time. Have a good one. Bye.